Good day, everyone. Welcome back to another lecture session for General Biology 2. The scope for this session is the 7th week lesson in your LMS. This is Jeremy Sagario, your lecturer for this topic. What is evolution according to Charles Darwin? According to Charles Darwin, evolution brings a remarkable change in the structure of a living organism which helps them to adjust in a better manner in the surrounding or environment and coordinate with the fluctuating conditions with time. So generally, evolution is a biological phenomenon that involves changes in a species over a period of time. The question is, what is the nature of the changes that a species undergoes? Basically, they are changes or there are changes in their structure. In the case of the horse, for instance, the change was in the body structure, such as a larger molars and premolars, bigger and more powerful legs, or bigger body size. Take note that the changes may be small but continuous. They accumulate through many generations up to a point when the later generation can no longer mate with the ancestral form and produce a fertile offspring. At this point, the later generation has become a new species different from the ancestral form. This lesson focuses on the theories that emerge as several curious people tried to study the evolution of life forms on Earth. With this, be guided with the following objectives. So at the end of the lesson, you should be able to first, trace the development of evolutionary thoughts, and second is to summarize the contributions of different scientists to the field of evolution. To start this lecture, we will first discuss the development of evolutionary thoughts. Take note that the earliest concepts of evolution did not start with Charles Darwin. It was in the 18th century that many naturalists began to state their idea on how life might started since creation. Paleontologists discovered many fossils that gave them a picture of the past. Their discoveries made them more interested in the evolution of organisms and their environment. For us to know the people behind the development of evolutionary ideas, we will be using a timeline representation. Let us begin during the 17th century, wherein we have John Ray. First is he established the modern concept of species. In his idea, he informs everyone that members of one species do not interbreed with members of other species. So for example, species of flowers can only pollinate to the same type of species and not to animals, since animals belong to another species. Second, he first used the term species as the basic unit of taxonomy. A species is a group of organisms that share a genetic heritage that can interbreed and can also create offspring that are also fertile. Different species are separated from each other by reproductive barriers. These barriers can be geographical, such as mountain range separating two populations, or genetic barriers that do not allow them to reproduce. And lastly, he studied fossils and recognized them as remnants of organisms that were once alive. So fossils are any preserved remains or impressions or trace of any once living thing from a past of geographical age. Next, we have the timeline for 18th century where many scientists were able to contribute their ideas regarding evolution. First, we have Carl Linnaeus or Carolus Linnaeus. He developed the modern taxonomic system that is still used today. For his contribution, Linnaeus is known as the father of taxonomy. And taxonomy is the practice of categorizing and naming of species. The second scientist we have George Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon. He wrote a 36-volume natural history series, which was meant to address the whole of natural history, but only covers minerals, birds, and other animals. He also contributed to the debate on the age of the Earth, suggesting that our planet had initially formed in a molten state and that its gradual must have taken far longer than 70,000 years. And lastly, he also considered the role of vestigial organs. These are structures that have no apparent function and appear to be residual parts from a past ancestor. Examples of vestigial structures include human appendix, the pelvic bone of a snake, and the wings of flightless birds. Take into consideration that vestigial structures can become detrimental, but in most cases, these structures are harmless. The third scientist for the 18th century is Erasmus Darwin. He was Charles Darwin's grandfather. He believed that the offspring inherited features from their parents and that organisms today descend from a common ancestor. As a naturalist, he formulated one of the first formal theories on evolution in zoonomia, or the laws of organic life. He also presented his evolutionary ideas in a verse poem, The Temple of Nature. Although he did not come up with natural selection, he did discuss ideas that his grandson elaborated on 60 years later, such as how life evolved from a single common ancestor forming one living filament. He questioned how one species could evolve into another. Although some of his ideas on evolution might occur quite close to those of Lamarck, Erasmus Darwin also talked about how competition and sexual selection could cause changes in species. The fourth scientist for 18th century is Georges Cuvier. He studied and wrote books on comparative anatomy, which were extremely useful in interpreting the remains of fossils. He classified animals based on their human or their body plans. These classifications eventually become important in analyzing relationships among organisms. He also studied about fossils that arise now in the science of paleontology. Paleontology is the study of history of life on Earth as based on fossils. Fossils are the remains of plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and single-celled living things that have been replaced by rock minerals or impressions of organisms prepared in rock. The fifth scientist for 18th century is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Although the name Lamarck is now associated with a discredited view of evolution, Lamarck's notion that organisms inherit the traits acquired during their parents' lifetime had common sense on its side. Lamarck believed that living things evolve in a continuously upward direction from dead matter through simple to more complex forms toward human perfection. Species did not die out in extinctions, Lamarck claimed. Instead, they changed into other species. Since simple organisms exist alongside complex or advanced animals today, Lamarck thought that they must be continually created by spontaneous generation. According to Lamarck, organisms alter their behavior in response to environmental change. Their changed behavior in turn modified their organs, and their offspring inherited those improved structures. For example, giraffes developed their elongated necks and front legs by generations of browsing on high tree leaves. The exercise of stretching up to the leaves altered the neck and legs, and their offspring inherited these acquired characteristics. Sixth scientist, we have James Hutton. He is best known for his important contributions to the science of geology, which are uniformitarianism and the great age of the earth. Uniformitarianism states that the present geological features of Earth are the results of gradual processes such as erosion and sedimentation. Hutton was also the first person to propose a mechanism of natural selection to account for evolutionary change over time. Hutton argues that members of a species vary and that when the environment changes over time, those individuals best adaptive to the new environment will survive, while those poorly adapted will perish. Next, we have the scientists in 19th century. First, Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology, published in 1830, had a prevailing views of how Earth had been formed. His book was an attack on the common belief among geologists and other Christians that unique catastrophes or supernatural events such as Noah's flood shaped the Earth's surface. Lyell also argued that the formation of Earth's crust took place through countless small changes occurring over vast periods of time, all according to known the natural laws. His uniformitarian proposal was that the forces molding the planet today had operated continuously throughout its history. The second scientist for 19th century is Charles Robert Darwin. One of his highlighted contributions was the development of his theory of evolution by natural selection as a coherent explanation for the form and distribution of species in different locations. The theory proposes that the fittest individual organisms are those with characteristics best suited to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. And then they pass on these desirable characteristics to their offspring. Take note that the theory of natural selection does not favor traits that are somehow inherently superior. Instead, it favors traits that are beneficial in a specific environment. Traits that are helpful in one environment might be harmful in another. The last scientist for the 19th century is Alfred Russel Wallace. Though he made an independent study on the origin of organisms, Wallace arrived at the same conclusion as Darwin's, that organisms with favorable traits are those that carry on to the next generation. Thus, Wallace had contributed to some of the postulates of Darwin's theory of evolution. So these are the proponents of evolutionary theories with their significant contributions to evolution. Among these scientists who provided their ideas regarding evolution, we have two of them with contradicting ideas regarding the principles on how evolution works to different organisms or species. First, we have here Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. Who is Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin contributed significant ideas to our current understanding about the concept of evolution. He was born in England on February 12, 1809. Darwin's voyage on the Beagle. In 1831, when Darwin was just 22 years old, he set sail on a specific expedition on a ship called the HMS Beagle. He was the naturalist on the voyage. As a naturalist, it was his job to observe and collect specimens of plants, animals, rocks, and fossils wherever the expedition went ashore. Darwin was fascinated by nature, so he loved his job on the Beagle. He spent more than 3 years of the 5-year trip exploring nature on distant continents and islands. Darwin's most important observations were made on the Galapagos Islands. This is a group of 16 small volcanic islands, 966 kilometers off the west coast of Equator, South America. Individual Galapagos Islands differ from one another in important ways. Some islands are rocky and dry, others have a better soil and more rainfall. So Darwin noticed that the plants and animals on the different islands also differed. For example, the giant tortoise on one island had saddle-shaped shells, while those on another island had dome-shaped cells. This started Darwin thinking about the origin of species, so he wondered how each island came to have its own type of tortoise. Darwin's contribution to evolution. Darwin wrote and published a book titled On the Origin of Species, in which he proposed the now famous theory of evolution by natural selection. He then presented pieces of evidence demonstrating this process, which, according to him, has been taking place for millions of years. Darwin also tried to explain how evolution occurs naturally. With the help of what he learned from Thomas Malthus, an English economist, Darwin realized that high birth rates and a shortage of life's basic needs would eventually force organisms into competition for resources. The struggle for existence means that members of each species compete to obtain food, living space, and other necessities of life. In this struggle, those that are stronger and faster can hunt for food and protect themselves from their enemies. For these ideas, Darwin's theory of evolution represents a giant leap in human understanding, as it explains and unifies all of biology. Second scientist, we have Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and his theory of evolution. Lamarck is a French naturalist who was one of the first scientists to recognize that living things have changed over time. He proposed that all species descend from other species. Contributions of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. In 1809, Lamarck published his theory of how organisms change over time. His main ideas include that through selective use or disuse of organs, organisms may acquire or lose certain traits during their lifetime, an idea known as Lamarckism. Additionally, those traits that have been acquired can be passed on to the next generation. So over time, these processes lead to changes in a species. Under theory of use and disuse, he claimed that organisms could alter the size, shape, or structure of body parts or organs by continuously using them in new ways. The classic example used to explain the concept of use and disuse is the elongated neck of the giraffe. According to Lamarck's theory, a given giraffe could, over a lifetime of straining to reach high branches, develop an elongated neck. Another example Lamarck used was the toes of water birds. He proposed that from years of straining their toes to swim through water, these birds gain elongated, webbed toes for better swimming. These two examples demonstrate how use could change a trait. By the same token, Lamarck believed that disuse could cause a trait to become reduced. The wings of penguins, for example, would be smaller than those of other birds, because penguins do not use them to fly. The second part of Lamarck's mechanism for evolution involved the inheritance of acquired traits. He believed that traits changed or acquired over an individual's lifetime could be passed down to its offspring. One good example that illustrates this process is the presence of long trunks in elephants. Lamarck believed that the ancestors of elephants had short trunks. As ancestral elephants struggled for food and water, their trunks stretched to reach the water and branches. Their offspring eventually inherited the trait for long trunks and not the trait for short trunks. Lamarck's theories of use and disuse and the inheritance of acquired characteristics proved to be incorrect in several ways. First is, unlike Darwin, Lamarck was not aware of how traits were inherited. And second, he did not know that the heritable characteristics of organisms are not affected by their behavior. His theory, for example, about elephants was quite different from Darwin's idea. For Darwin, most elephants used to have short trunks and some had longer trunks. When food and water were scarce, those with short trunks were not able to reach the water and the food, and they eventually die. The ones with longer trunks survive and reproduce. To end this discussion, may I leave to you this quote from Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent one, but the one that is most responsive to change. Thank you for listening and have a good day.